Jaz vse prav lepo pozdravljam na današnjem dogodku, ki je pravzaprav predstavitev dveh vsebinsko povezanih publikacij in nekaj novosti v zvezi z biografijo v Ljubljani rojenega skladatelja Francesca Polinija. Povezava teh dveh publikacij pa ni le vsebinska, mogoče prej zaprete vrata. Saj je bil doktor Miucci, tu na moji desni, recenzent publikacije, ki smo jo izdali v Ljubljani. Še malo več pa pozneje. Ta dogodek današnji organizira Muzikološki inštitut Znanstveno-raziskovalnega centra Slovenske akademije znanosti in umetnosti, založba ZRC, torej hišna založba, ki je izdala glasbeni del, torej 3 sonate, in Italijanski center za kulturo v Sloveniji. Zelo sem vesela, da so se odzvali moji pobudi, da sodelujejo, saj formalno, pri tej predstavitvi, saj gre za mednarodno sodelovanje z italijanskim kolegom in pravzaprav tudi skladatelj je nekako v kulturni zavesti razpet med več držav, med drugim tudi Slovenijo in Italijo. Današnjo predstavitev bom vodila jaz, torej Metoda Kokole, sem predstojnica Muzikološkega inštituta in glavna in odgovorna urednica zbirke Monumenta, torej, v kateri so izšle 3 sonate. Sem seveda tudi raziskovalka in sem bila vodja evropskega projekta o glasbenih migracijah, ki se je sedaj sicer že končal, vendar prav v okviru tega projekta o glasbenih migrantih, kot je bil Polini, smo se odločili posvetiti tudi skladatelju Francescu Poliniju, kot skladatelju rojenemu v Ljubljani, ki je pozneje deloval drugod, torej emigrant. Na tem projektu se je z Polinijevimi sonatami, življenjem in sploh pripravo tega zvezka ukvarjal dr. Radovan Škrjanc, torej sama vsebinsko nisem raziskovalka Polinijeve glasbe, vse to je opravil kolega Škrjanc, ki žal zaseden danes in se nam ni mogel pridružiti, tako da bom jaz povzela njegove ugotovitve, razen v majhnem delčku, ki sem ga opravila sama v zadnjem času, pravzaprav boste slišali pozneje na pobudo kolega Miuccija. Naj predstavim še kolega, please excuse me, I will do it in Slovenian. Dr. Leonardo Miucci je rojen Milančan in ima bogato in široko glasbeno izobrazbo. Diplomiral je iz klavirske igre, nato je diplomiral in magistriral iz komorne glasbe, se nadalje izobraževal v fortepianu, v Salzburgu in v Hagu, kjer je 2011 tudi magistriral. Sočasno je na univerzi v Bernu v Švici študiral še muzikologijo in prav letos doktoriral iz filoloških in izvajalskih aspektov izvedbene prakse Beethovenovih klavirskih sonat. To delo bo predvidoma objavljeno leta 2018 v Bonnu, kjer se bo sedaj zaposlil v Beethovenovi hiši oziroma v inštituciji, ki deluje tam. Letos pa bo pri Italijanskem muzikološkem društvu izšla še monografija o historično zavedajoči se izvajalski praksi Beethovenovih klavirskih sonat. Dr. Miucci je izjemno aktiven tako kot muzikolog, kot tudi izvajalec. S predavanji nastopa na številnih elitnih univerzah po vsem svetu, pravkar se je vrnil iz Združenih držav, in koncertira ter snema po Evropi in ZDA, pri čemer povezuje svoje raziskovalne rezultate, torej muzikološki del svojih zanimanj, z svojo izvajalsko prakso. Tistega, ki ga zanima še malo več, ima na voljo pred dvorano njegovo biografijo, kjer so še podatki o raznih snemanjih in teh obiskih. Leta 2016 sta izšli 2 njegovi deli, posvečeni Francescu Poliniju. Biografski članek z nekaterimi novosti o Polinijevem kasnejšem življenju, torej ne ljubljanskem delu, temveč v času, ko je bil razpet med Milanom in raznimi evropskimi prestolnicami, ter dvojezična kritična izdaja Polinijeve klavirske šole iz leta 1812, o čemer bo spregovoril sam malo pozneje v nadaljevanju. Ta dogodek, ki ga izvajamo sedaj, je podprl Znanstveno-raziskovalni center Slovenske akademije znanosti in umetnosti, knjigarna Azil in posredno še Javna agencija za knjigo Republike Slovenije. Še nekaj o dnevnem redu, torej najprej bomo povedali nekaj o skladatelju, kar bo prevzeto pretežno po zadnjih besedilih dr. Radovana Škrjanca. Nato bo kolega Miuči predstavil svojo izdajo Polinijeve klavirske šole iz leta 1812, glede na to, da je tudi aktivni pianist in fortepianist, bo pospremil z nazornimi primeri. In nazadnje se bomo zelo na kratko ustavili še pri naši izdaji 3 sonat, ki je bila sicer v okviru rednih predstavitev publikacij založbe ZRC SAZU že javno predstavljena leta 2015, tako da to bo zelo na hitro. Torej, k biografiji, zelo na kratko. Francesco Polini niti med muzikologi, niti med pianisti ni neznano ime. V zadnjih nekaj desetletjih so Polinijevo glasbo, predvsem njegove klavirske skladbe, muzikologi začeli upravičeno ponovno odkrivati in jih vrednotiti skozi prizmo najnovejših raziskav in drugačnega pogleda na preteklo glasbeno ustvarjalnost. Zanimanje italijanskih kolegov je Polini sicer pritegnil že v 60. letih prejšnjega stoletja, močno pa se je povečalo predvsem od 90. let dalje in po premoru zopet v zadnjih letih. Za domače muzikologe je bila zanimiva predvsem Polinijeva povezava z Ljubljano. V desetletju od srede 80-ih do sredine 90-ih let 20. stoletja so išle 4 razprave o Polinijevih sonatah, o variacijah, o njegovi družini in skladateljevih ljubljanskih letih ter njegovem pesenskem ustvarjanju. 2 od teh sta bili prevedeni tudi oziroma objavljeni v angleškem jeziku. Zadnji slovenski prispevek se nahaja v obsežnih komentarjih k tudi dvojezični izdaji 3 sonat, opus 26, in to besedilo je, kot že rečeno, prispeval kolega dr. Radovan Škrjanc. Izdaja, ki je čisto na koncu predstavljena, je izšla leta 2015. Na italijanski strani pa je zadnje prispevke, kot vidite, prispeval prav kolega dr. Miuči. Torej, napisal je pregledni članek, biografski članek z novostmi, ki jih je v okviru svojega raziskovanja sam odkril, in kritična izdaja klavirske šole. Torej, nekaj novosti sem lahko dodala pozneje tudi sama, o čemer v nadaljevanju. Tako da tudi ta članek še ni kompletna biografija, ki ima še vedno veliko lakun. Francesco Polini se je rodil v Ljubljani in bil 26. marca 1762 krščen v osrednji cerkvi, stolnici svetega Nikolaja. Izhajal je iz cenjene kranjske družine italijanskega izvora z odličnimi zvezami. V mladostnih letih je bil nadarjeni mladenič izrazito nemernega duha. Desetletje po njegovi smrti, torej leta 1863, ga je domači zgodovinar Henry Costa opisal kot človeka, ki se je, citat, odlikoval z moško lepoto, uglajenim vedenjem in znanjem več jezikov, tudi kot v lepih umetnostih, konec citata. Nadalje pravi, da je bil pravi salonski lev in dobrodošel gost družabnih prireditev z glasbo in gledališčem. Tako o njem Costa, že v 19. stoletju. Na njegovo najzgodnejšo vzgojo v Ljubljani je nedvomno vplival dober, gmotni in visok družbeni položaj njegove družine, a tudi njeni stiki z najbližjim sorodstvom, zlasti družino Zois in morda tudi Pozareli. Michelangelo Zois, Franceskov krstni boter in soprog njegove sestrične, predvsem pa njegov sin Žiga Zois, sta namreč sodila v sam vrh izobraženske elite v kranjski prestolnici. Njuna hiša na Bregu pa je bila od 70 let dalje njihovo osrednje zbirališče. Kar bi lahko vplivalo tudi na poznejšo glasbeno pot Francesca Polinija. 15 let starejši Žiga baron Zois je bil s Polinijem torej v dvojnem sorodstvu. Bil je prvorojeni sin Franceskove sestrične, njegova sestra pa je bila poročena s Franceskovim stricem Jožefom Anguštinom Polinijem. Podobno kot Michelangelo Zois so tudi Poliniji v naše kraje prišli iz severne Italije. Sprva v Gorico, kmalu po letu 1700 pa v Komendo, kjer je Franceskov ded Pavel Felix ustvaril družino z Ivano Kodeli, tudi znane družine. Nato se je preselil v Redovlico in iz Redovlice v Ljubljano. Franceskov oče Janez Krizostom, v nekaterih verih imenovan tudi Janez Jurij Georg, je leta 1738 prišel iz Redovlice v Ljubljano kot deželni zdravnik in se tu kar 4-krat poročil, ter gmotno hitro napredoval. Rodu Polinijev je leta 1779 pridobil plemiški stan. Postali so baroni. V svoji stroki je Janez Krizostom, Zlatoust, še posebej uspel, torej kot zdravnik. Izumil je lastno zdravilo proti sifilisu, v verih imenovan decoctum Polini, nek zvarek, ki mu je prineslo evropski sloves in znatne dohodke, ter tudi sinu Francesku mnogo priložnosti za spoznavanje evropskih dežel in njegovih klientov iz najvišje evropske elite. Francesco je bil njegov najmlajši otrok v drugem zakonu, sklenjenem z Marijo Elizabeto baronico Pozarelli. Na tem mestu je treba opozoriti, da njegova mati v krstnem listu imenovana Marija Elizabeta, rojena Pozarelli, kot ste videli na prejšnjem posnetku, ni bila, kot se je doslej navajalo, skladateljeva sestrična iz Gorice, rojena 1711, temveč Marija Ana Elizabeta, rojena baronica Pozarelli, hči Johana Jozefa Antona Pozarellija in njegove soproge Marije Terezije, rojene Moškon. To izvemo iz izvirnega dokumenta, ki se nahaja v arhivu Republike Slovenije, torej zapuščinskega inventarja po njeni smrti, katerega del je tudi prepis njene ženitne pogodbe z zdravnikom Polinijem. Na možno napako v dosedanjem navedku o tej sestrični iz Gorice me je ob zaključevanju svojega preglednega članka o Francescu Poliniju opozoril kolega Miucci, ki se je spraševal, ali ni morda napaka, da bi ga mati rodila pri 51 letih, kar je bilo za tisti čas res skoraj neverjetno. Na podlagi njegove želje sem se zakopala v biografijo Francesca Polinija in ubrala obratno pot, torej iz najnovejših člankov proti starejšim člankom in sem iskala vir tega podatka. Po iskanju sem ugotovila, da je Lukman v svojem članku iz leta 1740 uporabil prepise matrik plemičev na Kranskem, ki jih je objavil Ludwig Schiwitz von Schiwitzhofen leta 1905. Torej, uporabljena je bila sekundarna literatura, izpiski, ki so ponavadi precej zanesljivi. Torej, vsi zgodovinarji se opirajo na te zapiske in zato tudi tu nekako ni bilo razloga za dvom. V teh zapiskih se dejansko najde Marija Elizabeta, rojena Pozarelli, rojena 1711 v Gorici in Schiwitz je to upravičeno, glede na to, da je bil sam Goričan, nekako povezal z krstnim listom Francesca Polinija in mu je gospod prisodil kot mati. Torej, izvirno napako je zakrivil Šivic, ko je v svojih komentarjih pravzaprav povezal goriško Marijo Elizabeto z Franceskom Polinijem. Ker je to sekundarni vir in mi pripomba kolega Miučija ni dala miru in se mi je res zdelo, da 51 let za otroka v 18. stoletju je res malo preveč, sem se povezala z našimi zgodovinarji, predvsem se moram zahvaliti dr. Mihu Preinfalku, ki me je usmeril v nekatere arhivske vire in sem nadaljevala torej z arhivi. Najprej v Lazarinjevi genealoški zbirki, ki vsebuje ogromno podatkov spet o članih plemiških družin. In v tej zbirki sem najdla veliko število pozareljev, veliko število Polinijev in podatki so si ponekod nasprotovali. Zagotovo pa je bilo to, da je bila Polinijeva mati pri rojstvih svojih 6 otrok imenovana na 3 različne načine. Pri prvih 2 otrokih je bila zapisana kot Ana Elizabeta, pri naslednjih samo Elizabeta in pri zadnjih 2, Polinij je bil njen najmlajši, se je imenovala Marija Elizabeta. Torej, 3 imena, 1 oseba in veliko pozareljev. Še vedno ni bilo odgovora, razen to, da Polinijeva mati ni prišla iz goriške veje, temveč iz kranjske veje pozareljev. V teh virih, še vedno sekundarnih, je bila ponekod pripisana Bernardinu Pozareliju, kar pa tudi ne drži, kot sem videla pozneje. Torej, iskala sem naprej, pot me je pripeljala v Arhiv Slovenije, kjer hranijo izvirne dokumente, torej imela sem mogoče veliko srečo, da hranijo tudi zapuščinski inventar Marije žene zdravnika Polinija iz leta 1765 in v tem dokumentu sem ugotovila, da se je v prepisu ženitne pogodbe se je sama podpisala kot Marija Ana Elizabeta, rojena Pozareli, plemenita. Tako da, in ta dokument seveda vsebuje tudi podatke o očetu, ki je bil Johann Josef Anton, plemeniti Pozareli, in materi, torej Mariji Tereziji Jožefi, rojeni Moškon, ki je umrla leta 1733. Torej, malo sem raziskala potem še rod Pozarelijev, teh kranjskih, da bi si razjasnila, kakšna družina to je bila. Torej, Pozareli se je z Moškonovo poročil leta 1701 in njena družina, torej Moškon, mu je leta 1724 prepustila lastništvo svojega gradu Jablje pri Mengšu, v bližini Ljubljane. Imela sta 15 otrok, torej ogromna družina. Prvi 3 so bili rojeni v Ljubljani do 1704. Od tega leta pa vsi razen zadnjega so bili krščeni v Kamniku, zadnji pa v Mengšu leta 1726. Zaradi česar lahko sklepamo, da je številčna družina dejansko prebivala na gradu Jablje. Imeli so sicer tudi greščino Volčji potok. In družina je imela 2 hiši v Ljubljani. Marija Ana Elizabeta je bila krščena v Kamniku 29. septembra 1721. Poročila pa se v Ljubljani v marcu leta 1749. V literaturi navajani datum smrti je točen. Umrla je v Ljubljani 9. maja 1765. Nekaj o družini Pozareli, samo na kratko. Družina Pozareli se je na Kranjskem ustalila že v 17. stoletju. Predvsem je znana veja z graščine Duple pri Naklem, iz katere je izhajal tudi sodobnik skladateljevega očeta, Anton Franc Pozareli, ki je bil sredi 18. stoletja dvakrat poslanec in načelnik deželnih stanov ter svetnik Kranjske deželne pravde. Leta 1732 je postal član bratovščine svetega Dizma, torej elitnega duhovnega in kulturnega združenja ljubljanske Smetane. Družina Pozareli je imela v Ljubljani, kot že rečeno, 2 hiši, in sicer eno pred Špitalskimi vrati in tako imenovan Abondijev dvorec. Kulturno vlogo jabelskih Pozareljev bo treba še raziskati, a vabljiva bi bila hipoteza, da so prav oni grad sredi stoletja, 18. bogato likovno opremili, tudi s številnimi z glasbo povezanimi prizori. Eden je tamle prikazan. Pa se vrnimo sedaj z Polinijo. Ker je Francesco Polini po materi osirotel že pri 3 letih, bi lahko sklepali, da so ga morda vzgajali skupaj s sorodniki iz hiše Zois. Saj je bila vloga botrov, ne pozabimo, njegov boter je bil Michelangelo Zois, med drugim tudi to, da v primeru osirotelosti poskrbijo za mladoletne otroke. Žigova mlajša sestra je zagotovo igrala čembalo in sodeč po nakupih glasbenih not za kvartet ter skladb za čembalo, prečno flavto in violino leta 1770, lahko z gotovostjo rečemo, da je bila palača na Bregu tudi kraj muziciranja. Ker ne poznamo nobenih dokumentov, ki bi pričali o Franceskovem otroštvu in šolanju v Ljubljani, lahko seveda le sklepamo, da je imel sprva zasebnega učitelja, potem pa bi se lahko vpisal na tedaj že sekularizirano srednjo šolo, ki so jo nekoč vodili jezuiti. Ukinjenih so bili leta 1773 z jožefinskimi reformami. Stala pa je ta šola, kot vidite, v neposredni bližini njegovega doma na Starem trgu, res za vogalom. Naj si gre zasluga zasebnega učitelju ali šolanju na ustanovi, nesporno je dejstvo, da je do svojega 20. leta postal izurjen in dober pevec, pianist in violinist. Njegova družinska povezanost s krogom, ki je bil italijanski operi še posebno naklonjen, pa je nedvomno botrovala pevskim nastopom v domačih glasbeno-gledaliških predstavah, še preden se je podal na potovanja po Evropi. O tem piše Henrik Costa. Ti so ga v desetletju, te potovanja so ga pripeljali, v desetletju med 1783 in 1790 popeljala v Prago, Pariz in na Dunaj. Po tem letu pa se je bolj ali manj ustalil v Milanu, kjer je nato ostal do smrti leta 1846. Francesco Polini je v mladih letih v Ljubljani osvojil glasbene osnove in si izoblikoval okus za tedaj modno glasbo. Predvsem, ko je v svojih letih potovanj prijateljeval in se družil s člani vplivnega evropskega plemstva. Predvsem je poleg s plemiči je prijateljeval tudi z nekaterimi vodilnimi glasbeniki in skladatelji. Od Wolfganga Amadeusa Mozarta sredi 80. let na Dunaju do Vincenza Bellinija v 20. in 30. letih 19. stoletja. Med številnimi glasbenimi pokloni njemu, Poliniju, izstopata posvetilo 2 Mozartovih skladb in posvetilo Bellinijeve opere Mesečnica. Nekateri viri trdijo, da je bil Mozartov učenec, a to je v resnici malo verjetno. Te trditve so nastale najbrž zaradi Mozartovega posvetila Poliniju 2 na novo zloženih glasbenih točk za zasebno uprizoritev opere Idomeneo, Mozartove opere Idomeneo, v palači kneza Johana Adama Jozefa Auersperga na Dunaju 13. marca leta 1786, torej 5 let po premieri. Pri tej predstavi je kot pevec tenorist sodeloval tudi mladi baron Polini. Torej, družina takrat je bila že poplemenitena in skoraj zagotovo gre za našega skladatelja. Pel pa je vlogo Idamante. Dobro leto zatem se je Polini na Dunaju tudi oženil z baronico Jožefo Bernreider in tam bival do njene smrti leta 1792. Ta podatek je tudi nov in smo ga dolžni kolegu Miučiju. Od tedaj se je v Ljubljano vračal le začasno, zadnjič menda oktobra 1802. Edini zanesljiv podatek o Polinijevem formalnem glasbenem šolanju je njegovo učenje v Milanu od leta 1793 pri Nicoloju Zingarelliju, znanemu opernemu skladatelju, s katerim se je pozneje močno spoprijateljil. Takrat se je v Milanu stalno naselil in se tam leta 1799 vnovič poročil s precej mlajšo harfistko Mariano Gasparini. O tem precej piše kolega Miucci v svojem zadnjem članku. Polinijevo milansko obdobje, kot že rečeno, je v razpravi, ki je šla leta 2016, dostopna je spletno, tako da jo vsak lahko prebere, z novimi podatki in objavami dokumentov, predvsem s korespondenco dunajskega prijatelja Kandlerja, dopolnil kolega Miucci. Torej, njegov prispevek so podatki in sklepanja, ki izhajajo iz te korespondence, ki nakazuje, da je bila povezava med dunajskimi kulturnimi in glasbeni krogi in milanskimi večja, kot se je doslej mislilo in tudi pomembnejša v prvih desetletjih 19. stoletja. Polinijev razmeroma obsežen opus je nastal večinoma po letu 1790. Obsega pa poleg cerkvene glasbe še samospeve, komorne skladbe, 5 glasbeno-scenskih del in seveda številne skladbe za klavir, s katerimi je še posebej uspel, bile so zelo priljubljene. Uspel pa je tudi z drugimi deli, ne samo s klavirskimi, predvsem z opero La Casetta nei Bocchi, uprizorjena leta 1798 v milanskem teatru Canobiana in s 3 leta pozneje izvedeno kantato Il trionfo della pace v milanski Skali. 2 Polinijevi skladbi za veliki zbor in orkester so na primer igrali celo med kronanjem Napoleona za italijanskega kralja v milanski katedrali leta 1805. V središču Polinijevega ustvarjanja je bila klavirska glasba. Njegova klavirska dela so tiskale nekatere tedaj najpomembnejše založbe v Evropi, na Dunaju, v Parizu, v Leipzigu, Zürichu in seveda založba Ricordi v Milanu. O njej je redno poročala tudi ena vodilnih glasbenih revij, Allgemeine Musikalische Zeitung v Leipzigu, največkrat pohvalno in z velikim občudovanjem Polinijeve virtuoznosti. Zato ni presenetljivo, da so ga še po koncu življenja cenili kot enega najpomembnejših predhodnikov Franza Liszta, ki je Polinija med drugim tudi sam zelo spoštoval. O Poliniju kot učitelju klavirja danes lahko še največ izvemo iz njegovih didaktičnih klavirskih del, iz učbenika Metodo per clavicembalo, izdanega leta 1812, s katerim je Polinij postavil temelj sodobni italijanski klavirski pedagogiki. In skladb, kot so denimo sonate opus 26, ki so izšle le nekaj mesecev po omenjeni metodiki, kot njen praktični del in nadaljujejo starejšo italijansko tradicijo pisanja dvostavčnih didaktičnih skladb za klavir. Torej, v tem trenutku smo prišli do leta 1812 in teh 2 vsebinsko povezanih publikacij, ki sta išli naša leta 2014 in kolegova leta 2016 v Sloveniji in Italiji. I will now ask you to present finally Polini's Metodo per clavicembalo in your edition.
Yes, we do it in English.
Yes,
English will be
English better than
I'm so sorry I'm not able to speak Slovenian, not yet. No, firstly, let me say thank you to the Slovenian Institute of Musicology and to Dr. Kokole for having arranged this beautiful presentation. Why we wished to make a joint presentation of the Metodo and of the 3 sonatas, because there is a very strict continuity between these 2 works, namely, let's start from the Method, perhaps. Pollini moved in Milan in around 1792 after her wife, the first wife, died, and after Mozart died in 1791. And his fame, he was actually the only piano player at that time in North Italy who came to study in Vienna, and that was a necessary condition in order to affirm yourself as a keyboard player. And this is the reason why we had the commission of this method. We must know that in 1808, Milan Conservatory was founded under the Napoleon and the French Constitution. So after they started the piano class, of course, they needed a text to instruct students. And this is the reason why Acioli, that at that time was the director of the conservatory, asked Pollini to conceive a piano method, which would have been used not only for the piano classes of Milan conservatories, but that actually it became such a famous work which shaped entire generations of pianists, not only in Italy, but also abroad. So commission of this method came in the summer of 1811, and Pollini used around half a year to conceive the method, and the method has been published by Ricordi in Milan in February 1812. Immediately when we read the title, which of course is not that one, we might be surprised. The title in Italian reads Metodo pel clavicembalo. Thank you, Metoda. Metodo pel clavicembalo, which actually in Italian clavicembalo means harpsichord. So initially one could wonder, hey, but this method actually it's not a piano method, it's a harpsichord method. Of course, when I will explain you some of the contents of this method, of this treatise, we know out of doubt know that this has been conceived for piano. There is a practical and a marketing reason why the publisher, certainly not the composer, insisted to use this word harpsichord. Because you know, at that time, very late 18th century, early 19th century, piano started to be diffused very, very wildly in Europe. But if piano started to have a diffusion, at that time harpsichord already had a complete diffusion in all the networks of the European musical worlds. Namely, you might perhaps find somebody who did have not still a piano, but you find certainly musician. If you find a musician, they certainly had an harpsichord at the time. So it's the same, it's a marketing operation. Basically, the publisher wants to sell as much as he could copies of this method. And Pollini was not the only musician at the time who was doing such an operation. For example, when we think about Beethoven piano sonatas, all the title page of Beethoven piano sonatas till Opus 27, so till the Moonlight, in the title page we read sonata for fortepiano u clavicembalo or pour piano u clavecin. So you see, Pollini was not the only case. What about the contents of this great piano treatise? Pollini conceived this method in three major parts. The first part, which was in a very strict continuity with other example of keyboard treatises, namely he was providing the most important tools, technical tools for students. Then we have a second part where he actually is approaching and developing issues of performance practice, of interpretation, such as touch articulation, pedaling, rhythmical flexibility, and so on. Finally, there is and this is one, for example, of the innovation of this method. Last part is totally dedicated to improvisation. We'll be back afterwards on it. Pollini, as I said, conceived this, published this piano method in 1812, but actually was not the only edition he published. In 1834, he published a second edition, which actually is exactly like the first one, unless for an addition, he decided to enclose to this second edition 12 exercises conceived for the left hand only. And also this was a sort of innovation in the piano, in the musical piano world. Also about this topic, we go back afterwards. So, concerning the first part, well, here we find the most important issues. We have to consider that this method has been inspired to instruct, as I said, piano students. So of course he had to start from very basic information, so like how to sit on the piano, how to place your finger on the keyboard, how to articulate your fingertips, and so on. So these are, elements which we find also in other piano treatises, in former and in follower piano treatises. One of the very interesting issues we find in the first part is, which is really an innovation by keyboardists of that time, is the extreme attention which Pollini reserves to the touch. So how to actually and physically touch the keyboard. None of the composers had treated this topic in such way. Pollini actually conceived exercises with this aim. So namely, he says that you should place the fingertip, so just the last part of your finger, on the surface of the keyboard, trying to feel this surface without not playing it. And this is actually a way to relax your wrist and to try to obtain the best sweet and pleasant sound out of this instrument. Actually, this instrument you see on my right dates back late 19th century, very early 20th century. But the instrument used by Pollini were instruments imported from Vienna, so which were provided with a Viennese action. It's an extremely delicate action to master. Here, when you push the key, you have to actionate a power of around 40-45 grams. On those instruments of Pollini's time and of Mozart's time, it was even worse. You have to, the range of the action is around 15-20 grams, not more. So it's an extremely sensitive action. That's why composers were so much, this composer actually, was so much insisting on the reliability and on the reliability of the touch. Another extremely interesting element we find in this first part is the attention that Pollini gave to articulation and fingering. Of course, he was not the only one and not the first one who did it. For example, Türk or Milkmayer or Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach treatises had extensively treated this topic. Why? Because, fingering it's one of the most important technical issues when you are a harpsichord player. But on a fortepiano, this is sort of, again, another element of innovation. Why? Not just because he was describing the several types, and in a very precise and extensive way, the several types of fingerings, but he was actually using fingering as an interpretative clue. Namely, he was suggesting the performer to use different fingering on the same passage according to the musical idea which was backgrounding this passage. For example, I will play you an example. He's conceiving pattern of major third. So like, so third interval, pattern of third interval. And he's saying, watch out, when you need a paired sound, so a not legato sound, you must use only 1-3, 1-3, 1-3, 1-3, 1-3. So this is absolutely a harpsichord technique. So it would have sound like, so there is no legato at all. But he says, watch out, because when you really want to have a legato, then you must use a different fingering, which is 1-3-2-4, 1-3-2-4, 1-3-2-4. So in this way, you see, I can really play extremely legato. And all these suggestions, you know, were dealing with several aspects. First of all, we have the extremely rapid time decay of those instruments conceived in Vienna at that time. And therefore, there was such a strict correlation between the Viennese brilliant pianism, and the suggestion provided by Pollini. For example, this fingering, exactly as I explained you as an interpretative clue, it will be, we find exactly the same suggestion in a letter written by Ludwig van Beethoven around 1810, which was addressed to Karl Czerny, one of his students and great pedagogue of the first half of the 19th century, concerning piano education of Karl, the other Karl, the nephew of Beethoven. So Beethoven is writing, is addressing Czerny and say, please, teach Karl these two types of fingering, exactly the same what I showed you, because he will have to choose which kind of, this is a very nice metaphor, which kind of jewel Karl is searching for. So when you want to have a pearl jewel, you must use, so a pearl sound, a brilliant sound, you must use 1-3 or 2-4, as I explained before. But he says sometimes people and musicians are searching for other kind of jewels. So he was, of course, referring to the legato style, which was such an expressive tool developed by Beethoven, and therefore you must use the other thing. Keeping talking about technique, I would love to add another small detail, and which concern actually pedaling. This is a very, very delicate topic in the Viennese performance practice. Why? Because we find a sort of idiosyncrasy between what we find actually in the theoretical texts like this and the attitude of composer in the editions, namely, because of several reasons, again, coming back mainly and principally to the sound features of these pianos, damping pedal must have been a tool which certainly piano composers and piano performers of late 18th century were availing so much. And actually, composers of piano methods are suggesting very precise circumstances and cases when we should use pedal. Pollini does it so. And this is extremely interesting to me because he is quoting, Pollini is using some typical cases which we find also in other methods. For example, one of these cases says, look, you need to use pedal when, for example, left hand has to leave a very low note because he has to play another melody in the middle of the keyboard, so you cannot simply keep that melody. For example, so if I play with no pedal and I have a long P, of course it doesn't sound. So therefore I need to use pedal. And so I didn't make this example on E flat major for circumstances, but just because Pollini used this E flat major example in his piano method, saying, guys, here you seriously have to use pedal, but then he used the same example in the editions in the piano sonatas Opus 26, which you guys here in Ljubljana published. And it's so funny that exactly copying and past the same musical example, we don't find any pedal indication into the editions, into the score. Why? because this expressive tool at that time was actually left to the initiative of performer. Namely, Mozart, for example, never ever marked any piano pedal into his scores. But it's impossible to play Mozart piano sonatas, for example, on a Viennese Walter 5 and about 5.5 octaves piano. So has been done by Hummel, who was a very conservative exponent of the Viennese piano, brilliant piano school of the first half of 19th century, also like Pollini, student of Mozart. And also in his piano edition, in his piano method, we find so many circumstances where we should use pedal. But then when we look at the edition, we don't find any marks. So actually, this and other information, performing information, which the performer really needed in order to play in a certain way, in a proper way, these words. So this notation started to become complete only after Romantic generation. Why? Because in very early 19th century, we see that the expansion after French and Industrial Revolution and the rise of middle classes create what I like to call a first moment of musical globalization. So namely, musical world suddenly open to a huge crowd of people, middle classes, who had totally no idea how to play music, moreover how to play former repertory, namely the classical style music. And therefore, composers started to notate any detail into the score. But we, performer of 2017, when we have to play and even just philologically try to understand which were the performing indication of the former repertoire, we can't avoid to consider the context. So basically what we find in the score, it is just a very short part of the musical knowledge we need in order to perform properly these pieces. And that's why piano methods like this are extremely important at that time as nowadays, in order to, we say, to play in a historical, informed way. Going on other technical and performance practice issues developed by Pollini, another special mark is deserved by the rhythmical flexibility. Nowadays, we still think, actually, a huge part of piano world, think as much as in the piano performing world or in the academic or in the piano conservatories, that, for example, rhythmical flexibility has been a tool invented and discovered by Romantic generation in general and in particular by Chopin. This is a very huge historical lie. Actually, piano flexibility, rhythmical flexibility, it is a tool which dates back to an era even earlier than the Baroque era, and which dates back its roots into the vocal performance practice. So basically, when you have a performer, an instrument which is accompanying a singer, and the singer would have never, almost never, played exactly together with the accompanist. Why? In order to stress the melodic line. This tool has been heritated from the harpsichord and from the Baroque, from the harpsichord world, so from the keyboard world belonging to the Baroque era, and of course it has to be translated to the piano world as well, because we absolutely know that during the first half of 18th century, when the piano literature started to be composed, we assisted to this extreme continuity between the harpsichord playing and the first fortepiano school. I'm talking about the time of Carl Philipp Emanuel, the time of Mozart. And what we find in the method is actually the first technical and practical transcription of how a rubato should sound like. And this is not a coincidence, actually, that Pollini also had a career as a singer, because this sensitivity of a singer could have is translated totally on the keyboard. So Pollini says that actually when you have such a melody, so with a very easy configuration structure, so with not so many embellishment, a melody such this. Right? It should actually sound like so what do we find is that Pollini is postponing all the downbeat unless in three places. Tonic, beginning, cadence point, so the dominant with 4/6, final tonic. Exactly as Chopin did a good 20 years later. Why it is so important to have these testimonies? Because we don't have recording of these guys playing. So actually one will tell you, yes, I'm playing with a lot of rubato, but how this effect should have sounded like. And this first rhythmical transcription of the rubato, it was so striking at that time that Peter Lichtenthal, who was a very important guy who acted as a bridge between the Viennese culture and the North Italian culture, was a music lover who had contact with the most important exponent of the musical world of that time, like Beethoven, Archduke Rudolph, and so on. So he conceived a very important encyclopedia, so manual, encyclopedia of history of piano. And on The Voice, I think he published it around 1820. And at The Voice, rubato is basically copying and pasting this example provided by Pollini. Last part, the third part of this method, it is extremely important because of the improvisational and the aspect of piano improvisation. Well, we completely neglected this custom, actually, which is surviving a little bit only in the jazz attitude nowadays. But at that time, when you wanted to find really, to split, let's say, an amateur musician and a professional musician, you could simply ask him, please, to improvise. And at the time of Mozart, at the time of Beethoven, during piano concert, they were never, really almost never, performing pieces belonging to repertory as we do today. But because, they just didn't care to listen something which has been already composed. Audience was extremely attracted to the innovation, to those things which were sounding new. This is the first reason. Second reason is because if you are able to improvise, you are a master. At the time, as today, I guess, this is the reason why today we find a very few piano players who are able to improvise. It's nothing new. At that time also was happening the same. Only problem is that we call amateur musician professional today, which is actually a mistake. Why it is so important to be able to improvise? Not only under an harmonic point of view, but Pollini says that when you improvise, actually, you really technically master the keyboard. And this is actually the same operation which Johann Sebastian Bach did a few generations before when he published Il clavicembalo ben temperato, the full-tempered clavier. He did it actually not. He did it on purpose on all the different tonalities you can find on keyboard. Why? Because fingers and hands has to get used to every position on the piano. And Pollini is suggesting that you can do so only when you actually learn how to improvise. Therefore, he's providing skills basic skills for piano improvisation. It starts with very easy harmonic patterns till very complicated cadenzas. So the aim of Pollini is to basically provide the students and the performer with the most essential tools to be able to sit on the piano and play something, basically. As I anticipated before, in 1834, this method knows a second edition, and Pollini places very apparently in a weird way, named weird why, because it was something which was not yet common at the time. He conceived 12 exercises for the left hand only. Why? Again, this looks like having anticipated Chopin generation for a while. Because during classical style configuration, typical configuration of hands on keyboard, coming back from hereditating from the harpsichord tradition, you find basically, let me banalize please, melody on your right hand, Alberti bass on your left accompaniment. So that was somehow spoiling the left hand, because left hand was not playing those virtuosistic stuff which usually right hand was used to. So Pollini wants in 1830s the performer to develop the same skills for the which they had for the right hand, for the left hand as well. This is one reason. The second reason is that he's conceiving a sort of polyphonic hand. This is really another trait of innovation which Pollini had. Pollini was the first guy who conceived, we are used to read music in two staff. So we have the first staff with the violin key for the right hand, and the bottom staff for the left hand, usually in the bass clef. Pollini made an innovation which unfortunately didn't receive so much attention nowadays, but at that time it received a lot. So a musical staff conceived in 3 lines. So we have a top line for the melody, then we have a bass line for the accompaniment, and then we have a middle line which would have shared moments of accompaniment and melody either with the right or with the left hand. Why he did so? Because he really wanted to stress how much is important the melodic line in spite of the accompaniment. Because this tradition apparently during 30s has been lost. So Pollini is just suggesting the performer to be very careful to stress in terms of sound what it actually has to come to the light, namely the melody, and what it has to stay in the background, namely the accompaniment. Let me close my presentation in saying something that this method actually received a very huge fame in Italy, and not only. It actually has been used in conservatories during late 19th century, and it should have been receive a new attention now today, because as I said before, we find information which are lost in the musical knowledge, but that they are so essential and so significant in order to understand the performance practice of a time which was so different from ours, and where the musical notation was looking so differently than our notation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation of your work and the edition, as well as this insight into the performance practice of the time, which was very valuable, very important for us. So let me just continue and say a few things about the tre sonate. Samo nekaj besed, kot že rečeno, še o izdaji 3 sonat. Torej, naslanjam se v celoti na kolega Radovana Škrjanca. Klavirske skladbe Francesca Pollinija so danes zanimive vsaj iz 2 razlogov. Bile so še do nedavnega spregledane dela in hkrati so to kvalitetne skladbe svojega časa, ki še danes lahko služijo kot primeri za učenje klavirske igre, kot je povedal tudi kolega. Pollinijeve klavirske sonate so namreč glasbena dela, ki so bila v prvi vrsti namenjena razvedrilnemu, bolj ali manj zasebnemu muziciranju ter praktičnemu pouku. Zaradi česar je poznejše zgodovinopisje nanje skoraj povsem pozabilo, pa čeprav so bile v svojem času izjemno priljubljene, veliko izvajanje in mednarodno priznane. Torej, sodobno muzikološko vedenje in spremenjen pogled na glasbo začetka 19. stoletja, ki je tudi v nekdaj zapostavljeni salonski glasbi odkrilo kvalitete in njeno zgodovinsko vrednost, Paulinijevim skladbam sedaj ponovno vrača veljavo, tako v raziskovalnem, kot tudi v izvajalskem smislu. Tako da, če sem prav razumela, lahko pričakujemo tudi nove izdaje teh 3 oziroma 6 sonat. Paulinijeva klavirska dela, zlasti sonate opus 26, lahko, kot že rečeno, še vedno dobro služijo prvotnemu glasbeno-pedagoškemu namenu, saj svojo glasbeno vsebino in zmerno tehnično zahtevnostjo kvalitetno zapolnjujejo vrzel, kot pravi Radovan Škrjanc, ki je v klavirski glasbi iz okoli leta 1018 nastala med lažjimi instruktivnimi sonatinami na eni in koncertantnimi sonatami na drugi strani. Širše dostopne literature v tem prehodu med sonatino in veliko sonato je danes v resnici, pravi resnici najmanj. Pričujoča izdaja Paulinijevih prvih 3 sonat iz zbirke sicer 6 sonat opus 26 je znanstveno kritičen in deloma posodobljen prepis tiska teh skladb, ki je izšel leta 1812, malo potem, ko je izšla tudi klavirska šola, pri isti založbi, torej Ricordi v Milanu. Kopija originalnega izvoda tiska je bila pridobljena iz knjižnice konservatorija Giuseppe Verdi v Milanu, kot primerjalni vir za našo izdajo pa je bil pri reviziji uporabljen tudi edini znani rokopisni vir s temi sonatami iz začetka 19. stoletja, ki se danes nahaja v mestni knjižnici v Correggio. Torej, toliko o teh 3 sonatah. Kot že rečeno, so te 3 sonate išle v 59. zvezku naše zbirke Monumenta Artis Musike Slovenije, kajti le ta, saj v zadnjih letih ni namenjena samo slovenskim skladateljem v ožjem pomenu, temveč tudi glasbi tistih, ki so iz slovenskega etničnega prostora v preteklosti emigrirali drugam, ter ne nazadnje glasbi, ki se je ohranila v naših arhivih in se v preteklosti tu izvajali, gojili, tudi pisali. Posebnost tega zvezka je, kot sem že omenila, da je nastal v okviru evropskega projekta, torej gre za njegov evropski vidik. In je ena od 2 notnih izdaj, ki sta nastali v okviru tega projekta. Kot že rečeno, je bil Paulini vključen kot eden zelo pomembnih emigrantov iz slovenskega prostora v širši evropski prostor. Njegova glasba, če zaključim s to mislijo, je v vseh pomenih evropska in jo kot tako v smislu predajanja naše skupne kulturne dediščine kar najširšemu evropskemu občinstvu s to izdajo in sedaj skupaj še z njegovo metodo v klavirsko šolo predajamo v nadaljnjo uporabo tako raziskovalcem, kot tudi pianistom in glasbenim pedagogom. Preden bomo zaključili naše srečanje z prvim stavkom, the first movement, prvim stavkom variacijam prve sonate v naši zbirki, ki ga bo prijazno odigral dr. Miucci, bi samo povedala, da v knjigarni Azil na Novem trgu 2, tukaj nasproti čez Novi trg, tam, kjer so mizice zunaj, v knjigarni prodajajo te izdaje danes predstavljene po znižani ceni, pač samo na današnji dan. Tako da, če si kdo želi kupiti metodo, danes je pravi dan za to, ker potem jih tu v Sloveniji verjetno ne bo prav lahko dobiti. And now I would like to ask you to round up our meeting with some music.
Yes, shall we ask before if there are some questions after?
Okay.
What do you prefer?
Bomo sedaj odprli za diskusijo in bomo potem res zaključili z čisto glasbo. Če koga še kakšna stvar, ki smo jo povedali, zanima podrobneje, oziroma ima kakšno vprašanje za kolega Miuccija.
I do have a very short question. Mr. Miucci, earlier you discussed Paulini's notes on sustain pedal, But in his times, in the times of small Walter fortepiano, the sustain and damp were manipulated with the knees. Does he discuss?
No, he doesn't, because he published this method in 1812, and knee levers has completely replaced by pedal from here around since 1804.
Okay.
So the time when Pollini published it, knee levers were already out of custom. Of course, still people were owning old piano, earlier version of pianos, but usually, you know, this has been a constant marketing operation. The publisher would have never allowed you to talk about some former stuff. He wanted to, you know, always talk about future issues in order to sell more, you know, because he say, hey, this is the first method who's addressing this new expressive tool. So therefore, I think he will never ever mention knee levers, besides knee levers were already have been replaced by pedals.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Še kakšno zanimanje posebno? To pomeni, da smo bili izčrpni in sedaj I will ask you to
Thank you so
finally
much.
round up our
It
meeting.
would be possible to have, please, the former slide where we find the incipit of this sonata. So this sonata is the first one, as Metoda beautifully explained. It is the first one of a circle of 6 sonatas conceived by the composer in order to explain, to give a practical resolution of what he explained in the method. And look what he chose as a first sonata, as a beginning of a first sonata, a theme with variation. Why? Because theme with variation would have been the easiest way to approach musical issues and technical issues. So basically for a beginner. Why? Because as you can see, everything is built up on a very, very easy melody, which, and you don't find any difficulties in the harmonical patterns, because you have only tonic, dominant, and subdominant. You never have other kind of modulations, so it's not tricky under a harmonic point of view. And moreover, the student could focus on technical problematic in a very specific and subtle way. So we have the first variation, which would have teaching you to use scales for the right hand, second variation, rhythmical flexibility, third variation, and so on, so that the student could have had a sort of path to follow. And you know, in a sonata you find all these elements mixed together, plus very often you find a very difficult harmonical pattern. That would have been the following of this circle of sonatas. Of course, even if the melody is not embellished, doesn't mean it should have sounded easy. And this also was something which usually composers at that time were living up to the performer initiative, namely to embellish it and to make it somehow unique. And this is the reason why they usually used very easy theme and not so much embellished, so to leave out possibility to performer to make up their own version. Thank you.
much for this audio
Musical
presentation
example.
of Polini. Vsem se najlepše zahvaljujem za prisotnost in res sem vesela, da smo Polinija spoznali tudi zvočno, torej z samo izvedbo, in tudi sem vesela, da je ta klavir spet tukaj le malo živel v svoje pravo življenje. Lepa hvala in vabljeni na naše naslednje prireditve.